Good morning and welcome to our Fall Professional Education Workshop webinar series. My name is Toby Brune and I am the Executive Director at Foundations Community Partnership, a nonprofit private grant-making foundation in Doylestown, focused on the behavioral health and human service needs of children, young adults, and families in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. Earlier this year, FCP started celebrating its 15th anniversary. Since 2007, FCP invested more than $6 million in nonprofit organizations serving Bucks County and the greater community through grants and technical assistance, high school scholarships, service learning internships for college students, and education programs and research. Reflecting on FCP's long and proud history, our sincere thanks go to the many members of our board of directors, past and present, who gave their time and energy to help grow our organization, and to all of you for supporting and engaging in our professional education workshops. Unfortunately, the ongoing pandemic still won't permit a safe return to our familiar in-person workshops. So here we are again, and we are glad so many of you can join us from the comfort of your home, office, or wherever else you're watching today's informative and timely workshop. With me here this morning is our Associate Director, Caroline O'Connell-Sinton, who will now be reviewing important information on how to obtain your continuing education credits at the conclusion of today's presentation. Caroline?
Thank you, Toby. Good morning, and thank you for joining us. Since we're not meeting in person, we will be awarding CE credits using an online process. All instructions and necessary links can be found on the webinar page you access to reach this presentation. We ask all participants to complete the online evaluation form. If you're seeking CE credit, please be sure to check the box indicating the credential for which you're seeking credit. After you submit your evaluation, FCP will prepare your CE certificate and send it to you via email as a PDF document. If you prefer to receive a paper certificate instead, you can indicate that preference in the online evaluation form. For Pennsylvania certified educators seeking Act 48 credit, you will see a link on the same webinar page to complete the Act 48 assessment form, which is required by the PA Department of Education. As with CE certificates, we will email you a letter indicating that your Act 48 credits have been uploaded, unless you request a paper copy to be sent via email. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. You can find my email address and phone number on the webinar page.
Thanks, Caroline. As he's done in the past, Dr. Dan Weldon, our resident psychologist and senior consultant, continues to pen a pre- and post-conference blog to stimulate thinking and discussion about our workshop content. You can access the link to the blog on our homepage at fcpartnership.org. Before I introduce Dr. Jeffrey Bernstein, please visit our homepage at fcpartnership.org later this fall for more information about spring workshops. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's presenter. Dr. Jeffrey Bernstein is a psychologist with more than 30 years' experience specializing in child, adolescent, couples, and family therapy. He completed his postdoctoral internship at the University of Pennsylvania Counseling Center and holds a PhD in counseling psychology from the State University of New York at Albany. He has appeared on several TV programs, public radio, and has written numerous books, including The Stress Survival Guide for Teens, Mindfulness for Teen Worry, and the Anxiety, Depression, and Anger Toolbox for Teens. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jeffrey Bernstein.
Thank you, Caroline and Toby, for introducing me today. It's always an honor to get to speak and share ideas, and I know we're going to have a Q&A, so I look forward to some interaction after as well. As you know, today we're talking about taming big emotions in children and teens. And my gosh, throughout this pandemic, and as we're hopefully now at the time of this taping and going forward, coming out of the pandemic, big emotions in children and teens still need to be tamed. They needed to be tamed before the pandemic, throughout the pandemic, and now, of course, with this readjustment phase and going forward. And we know that the pandemic is not the only stressor that our children and teens face. We know that they face a lot of academic pressures, social media pressures. It's just been really rough for children and teens, and I'm always happy to be able to share at least some of my ideas of what I've seen help them. As I was introduced, I am a psychologist. I work mostly with children and teens and families. I've been doing this over 30 years, and I like to say that I know less now. Years ago, I believe I knew everything. But we're all learning and growing. It's with that spirit that I'm here today as well. You will see me at points looking down a couple times here and there at handouts when I'm talking about certain topics. I'm going to be referring to your packet. I wanted to provide handouts today because I wanted you to have tools as educators, as mental health professionals, working with children and teens. I really feel it's important to use tools. A lot of these tools are from my latest book, the Anxiety, Depression, and Anger Toolbox for Teens. So that's kind of what's referenced, but I also have some other handouts that I put together. And I'm hoping that as I speak, if something maybe isn't fully clear as we go through this presentation, you're going to see some tools supporting further some of the concepts that I'm speaking about. Okay, thank you so much again, and let's start with today's objectives. The objectives for today are to be able to, at least on a basic level, talk about the neuropsychological considerations of those big emotions of anxiety, depression, and anger in children and teens, to be able to describe the benefits of combining mindfulness, cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, and positive psychology. I've found that these three modalities, when used together, provide a very, very strong synergistic blend, if you will, to help children and teens cope. And I always say the two most important skills for life that I'm aiming in my work to help children and teens learn are the ability to calm down and solve problems. And I really feel these three interventions help with that. I know I'm still working every day on calming down and solving problems, and hopefully you are all as well. Okay. The next thing is to be able to list 7 different cognitive distortions, and there's actually one of the handouts covers those, that children and teens have around those big emotions of anxiety, depression, and anger, and others. And then the last part of your objectives for today is to be able to discuss the advantages and disadvantages of doing online therapeutic approaches with children and teens. As you can imagine, when the pandemic hit, I remember in March, April 2020, having to go into this whole new world of working, counseling children and teens online. I had so much anxiety about it as I was trying to learn it. So one of the things I did to manage my anxiety was I presented to the Pennsylvania Psychological Association a workshop on how to manage anxiety while I was struggling with my own in depression and big emotions in teens through online interventions. So I have some thoughts because necessity is the mother of invention, and I found myself really needing to come up in the best way I could with therapeutic interventions that would work in supporting children and teens throughout the pandemic when they weren't able to come into the office, and some still are not. Many have returned as of this time, but I still am finding that I'm doing more work, certainly than I used to. So I want to be able to touch on online interventions. Okay, let me just talk a little bit before we get into some of the handouts, some introductory points. This pandemic, what happened in 2020, as we're all now in, at least at the time of this recording, October 2021, kind of trying to get back to quote unquote normal, it was such a time of upheaval, as we all know, and I'm hoping that we can all stay mindful that as much as we're all trying to move on, that the impacts of this pandemic, of the world really spinning upside down in so many ways, metaphorically speaking, of course, but how our lives were just thrown into so much chaos. And so what I think some of the biggest problems were for our children and teens during this time were, one, the obvious was a loss of structure, a loss of known routines, kids not going to school on that Monday through Friday basis, not having the after-school activities they used to have, not being used to waking up in the morning, and we all know of so many families that struggled with, either single earner families, one income or dual career couples trying to manage their jobs and even figure out how to adapt them on Zoom and have meetings and needing their children and teens to be quiet and get them up for school and not go back to sleep. And it was just so much stress. And so that certainly was a big one for children and teens struggling with figuring all that out, as well as the parents and the adults. Another one that I saw was this anxious avoidance for the children and teens who had a lot of social anxiety, getting to, at the beginning of the pandemic, not go to school. Really kind of a lot of them were loving it. I mean, why wouldn't they? It was like one long, long snow day, if you will, right? But we all know that they were on the borrow now and pay later plan, which doesn't really work too well. So for a lot of kids who had anxiety and avoidance, I saw that spike up in so many children and teens. And a lot of them are still, some of the on my caseload, still having trouble kind of going back and getting reacclimated after that long stint of getting to avoid a lot of the things that were stressing them out at school. I think another thing that went on during this pandemic for so many children and teens, and is still going on, is children can be really sponges for their parents' anxieties and struggles. Kids kind of take things in and the parents may not even be aware of it. Children and teens worried about their parents losing their jobs. Maybe, I know in some cases where people did lose their jobs, or at least they were put on furlough for a while, laid off. Kids feeling that kind of stress as well. The fractured social context, that was a big one. I remember doing online therapy with a young lady who was a senior who was so pumped up for her senior year. And each week we would we would meet for a Zoom session, and she just looked so down, and she would, just kind of ticking off the different things that she was missing for that year, the prom and different types of activities, and it was just so much loss around the social context for kids of so many ages. I remember early on this one boy that I was working with, this young man, he was 11, 12, he wanted to go out and throw the football around with his friends, and his mother came out yelling because obviously they can't social distance if they're tackling each other in the backyard. So that was going on, those fractured social contacts. The schools, I think, really tried hard to accommodate by reducing workloads. Why wouldn't they? We're trying to get this technology of Zoom to work, and so a lot of things were put in a more lax manner. I'm hoping that's a word I can use because it was called for. They needed to relax some of the stressors, academic load. Well, of course, what happened for a lot of kids was they had less accountability. A lot of kids I knew that I was working with, they were kind of loving that they were on pass-fail for spring of 2020. So now we're asking kids to readjust and come back to being graded, and held more accountable to academic standards. That's been a tough transition on kids, and I think that impact is going to go on for a while as well, how to bring back accountability to the classroom. And again, by that I in no way am dissing on teachers or academic administrators. I'm just referring to what happened because of the times, because of the pandemic. And then there was just that whole piece of families cooped up together. Talk about opportunities for bonding and not being able to break things up. There was so much stress on families of having to be locked up together and not really getting to go out and have their own individual time. So that's what's really on the backdrop of my being here today. In addition to, obviously, as I mentioned before, life wasn't, and it never has been, but it wasn't a piece of cake for a lot of kids before the pandemic. There's been a heightened awareness of as I said earlier, social media stressors on children, increasingly their sense of competitiveness to get into colleges, to make their academic loads and the work that they do, the quality of their achievement with their academic load count so that they could move forward. Activities, there's just been a lot on children. We know that suicide is something we're keeping an eye on. The rates of suicide have been scary. And all of this comes back to emotional health and maintaining emotional health. So with that in mind, I want to talk a little bit about the neuropsychology at a basic level of the brain in terms of managing big emotions. So I really like Dan Siegel's hand model of the brain, which you could find on YouTube. It's also on your handout packet. I'm looking at it right now. This is, again, from my latest book, The Anxiety, Depression, and Anger Toolbox. This shows my version of the hand model of the brain in the handouts. And I'm going to give you actually my live demonstration right now. So this right here is obviously my hand, and here's my head. And if you can just bear with me, hopefully this will come a little more clearly to you as I go through this. So right here, this is my forehead, obviously. This is my prefrontal cortex, in plain English, my thinking brain. Right here is my, disregard the Fitbit, please. This here is my reacting brain, okay? This is what holds my big emotions, my limbic system. It holds my amygdala, anger, frustration. All those are living right here. And back here, okay, is my hindbrain. Okay, so that is my vital function control, right? My breathing, my heart rate, right? My blood flow. So we know that this part, the threat detection system here in the amygdala, has a pretty strong connection to this part, which is our hindbrain, our blood flow and our breathing. So when we feel anxious, when we feel really out of control, we have that pounding in our chest. Today, when I was trying to get here for this taping, I took a wrong turn, and then I didn't realize that there was a change in how we were doing this morning, so I came in pretty anxious. So now, hopefully, my heart rate has slowed down at least a little bit. But this is a very important part to understand about how our emotions work. Now, we really rely on this thinking brain up here, which, by the way, doesn't fully develop in children and teens. Most of us know that, but as a refresher, until the age of 25. By the way, I'm 60, and I'm still waiting for my thinking brain to fully evolve, but hopefully it's getting there. So what happens is when we get stressed out, when things get to us, okay, and our children and teens, clearly, when they face pressures, what happens is this reacting brain, and that's really all you need to remember from this model, by the way, is here's your reacting brain and here's your thinking brain. Keep it kind of simple, okay? This reacting brain starts to get jacked up. It starts to really kind of push up, and push up gets emotionally dysregulated. We use that term a lot as emotional health professionals, mental health professionals. It pushes up, and our thinking brain, right here, it goes offline. As Dan Siegel puts it when he shows this model, he calls it flipping your lid. Okay, and that's on the handout as well. You can see that there. We flip our lid. And what that means is that we just feel like nothing makes sense. We can't think straight. Okay, we all know what that feeling is like when the walls are closing in. And we get people sometimes talking to children and teens saying, just calm down, just take 3 deep breaths, you'll be okay. Count to 10. And they're just overwhelmed with emotions. So let me, by the way, talk a little bit about this part. Now that we're looking sort of at the neuroanatomy on a very basic level, why does it work if we can take those deep breaths? Why does it work? Well, I'm going to turn here and show you that as I put my hand on my chest and my hand on my abdomen, down here, I'm going to demonstrate some of the belly breaths. A lot of time when people are told to take deep breaths, they go like this. And what they're doing is they're just fueling that panic response, that chest breathing response. But when you really do diaphragmatic breathing, when you really do those belly breaths, okay, I'm right here and I'm breathing in and I'm expanding my belly like a beach ball. Oh, that feels so good. It really does. I might just do this the rest of the presentation and just have you watch me do deep breathing. But anyway, on a more serious note, as I keep going here, as I breathe in, I expand my belly. As I breathe out, it comes back in, okay? So I'm not really moving my chest. And if you want to help children and teens really learn how to do deep breathing, I really encourage the hand placement. A lot of us don't do that. We just say, take some deep breaths. And I see them in my office. And a lot of times when at least young children are in my office, I have a parent there, and I'll ask the parent, hey, can you just help Johnny or Sarah a little bit here in terms of getting them to really get that breath down to their diaphragm? Because we all know that often when it comes to things like deep breathing, you ask children and teens about it and they'll say, that doesn't work for me. Dr. Jeff, serve me up another. Serve me up another. Give me another. That doesn't work. A lot of children and teens, they might say that, but are we really teaching them correctly? Okay, so that's why this breathing is really helpful. Now let's go back to this hand model. Okay, if I'm breathing down here at my diaphragm level, and you can see on my hand model, this is my hindbrain. Here's my spine, right back here, okay? So this puts my diaphragm right here. So when I breathe deeply and I stimulate, okay, that part, that diaphragm, it actually stimulates my vagus nerve, okay? How exactly that happens, I'm not a neuroanatomy scientist, but I can tell you that that's the conventional wisdom. And when you stimulate that vagus nerve, it sends a response, that relaxation response up to calm it all down up here. Okay, so this is what's really important to keep in mind, why we need to teach breathing in a correct way. Another thing, using this hand model of the brain to look at interventions and the link to interventions, is when you say to somebody, hey, can you count to 10? Well, when you have this, when this thinking brain is offline, and then you say to somebody, to a child or teen, let's slowly count to 10 together. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm transferring all this focus here from this reactive part. I'm kind of calling out my thinking brain. I'm doing some simple logic function of counting, and that kind of brings it back to settle it back down. Think of it as like a glitter jar, your amygdala, your reacting brain. When you shake it up, the glitter goes everywhere. And when you can kind of get the focus off of that, allow it some time to slow itself down, that's what the breathing does and the counting does, as well as many other interventions that we'll be talking about throughout the rest of this talk. Okay, so I wanted to cover that with you. Going back to this hand model, I just want to make sure we have a good sense of this. There is a psychologist named Rick Hansen, and he has a great quote, and I want to make sure I say this correctly, that the mind is like Velcro for negative experiences, and it's like Teflon for positive ones. So that goes back again to this kind of neuroanatomy model, this hand model of the brain, that our amygdala, our limbic system here, the way it gets these this sense that things are bad, that, hey, this is scary, this is stressful, is it feeds in through the senses, through what we see, what we hear, what we smell. Now, the popular way to explain this is the evolutionary model. Some people don't believe in evolution. That's okay. That's fine. You can just keep this as the thinking brain and the reacting brain. For those who are good with the science, okay, the idea is that, the ancient beings, when they would see, and we've all heard about this in health class, right? Science, the saber-toothed tiger, there would be that fight, flight, or freeze response, right? They would grab things and throw them at the tiger to fight, or they'd run like heck, flight, or they'd freeze up and play dead. Like we all know, if we have a presentation for kids and children that can't come up with an answer during a test, whenever we feel anxious at the beginning of something, we get that kind of freeze. So fight, flight, or freeze is all an ancient, long-standing reflex, neuro reflex that's programmed within us. Now, we all know there aren't saber-toothed tigers like there used to be. But we have scary things in children's lives like, hey, I have a crush on this person, and what if I broke out today? Or this teacher looked at me the wrong way. What if they call on me? Or, I got to go sit at this table at lunch. What if they think I'm a jerk or a loser? What if I say something stupid? So we still respond the same way as if we're seeing a saber-toothed tiger. And I really like this hand model of the brain of those 3 types of interventions that I really use a lot in my work with children and teens, right? Mindfulness, because again, when we can kind of slow ourselves down with mindfulness, create that pause in the way that we process, we calm ourselves, then we can bring in CBT, right? Cognitive behavioral therapy, to identify those irrational thoughts, to learn to challenge them and replace them with more helpful ways to look at things. And when we can coach our children and teens to do this, they feel much better. And then we can bring in positive psychology interventions as well. That really helps children and teens. And we'll go over all this a little more as we're going forward, but I wanted to at least kind of give you a rationale for why we were kind of going this route with the hand model of the brain and how it fits nicely into the interventions that I'm talking about today. Okay, let me talk a little bit now. On page 4, you'll see the Child and Anxiety Disorders fact sheet. William Osler he was a physician, I want to say it was in the 1890s, and he had a quote, and I really love this quote: "Our bodies weep the tears that our eyes refuse to shed." And really what that refers to is how we can end up having gastrointestinal distress, stomach issues. In other words, we can have headaches. I get kids in my practice with both migraines and stomach issues. Feeling just kind of out of it, lethargy, feeling like we're shutting down in the face of stress and anxiety. So again, we go to that hand model of the brain that when we're constantly revving up, blood pressure goes up and we're feeling pretty reactive, and it takes a toll on our bodies. And anxiety sort of leads the charge on that. And there's 4 different types of anxiety disorders that I see a good amount of the time in the children and teens I work with. And I can't get into them in a lot of detail today, but I at least want to address them. These 4 types of anxiety disorders include panic disorder. And to qualify as a panic disorder, you need to at least have a couple panic attacks. Sometimes kids will say they had a panic attack, and when they tell me what that meant, they'll say, well, you know, they had a quick time not being able to breathe well, versus some other child who reports he had to go down, they had to go down to the nurse, they felt really dizzy, they felt like they were going to faint. So the point is, when you feel this acute sense of worry to the point that that glitter jar is just all over, that metaphorical glitter jar of shaking it up, your amygdala is just firing, that's the sense of that panic disorder, intense worry. They can't see themselves through anything. They feel like they're going to explode or quote unquote die. That's what we're talking about with panic disorder. And I get a lot of children and teens that come in and they'll share those types of experiences with me. Phobias. We have kids, I've had kids in my practice, scared of dogs, scared of bees, scared of thunder, lightning. Obviously, there's kernels of truth that we need to worry. I mean, we're programmed to, if we see something that looks threatening, like a dog or that we don't know, we kind of need to be a little careful. But when it takes over your life and you can't do certain things, you can't go outside, you can't, for some children and teens, they're afraid, usually up to around 11 or 12, to go upstairs. They get that kind of phobia response, and then I say, well, what's going to happen if you go upstairs? I don't know, you know, and that's a big thing that I like mindfulness and CBT and positive psychology, because it allows you to help children slow down and explore. Well, what does I don't know really mean? And then you kind of introduce some different ideas. So phobias are another big problem for kids. It's that persistent, unreasonable sense that something bad is going to happen. OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, which Edna Foa's work out of Penn has done a lot of work with exposure and response prevention, where you gradually expose a child to a certain fear, and then you kind of let them kind of stay in it without doing the response that they might do to avoid. That's kind of the main way that this is treated, through exposure and response prevention. I've also found, by the way, that when I have kids who have OCD-like symptoms and I kind of prescribe the symptom, kind of a paradoxical approach, that often works fairly well. So what I mean by that is, like, I had one guy, he was a very endearing young man, really nice kid, came in 16, who was just so much struggling about what religion is right. Happened to be that he went to a religious-based school. It was a Catholic type of teaching in his school, but he just couldn't help himself. He was on his iPad all the time and came in, Dr. Jeff, I just can't stop. And I asked the priest at my school, and I called a rabbi in the local community, and I'm trying to find people that know a lot about Islam. I need to know which religion is really right. And of course, that's a whole separate talk, and I wouldn't be an expert on being able to give you the answer. And I don't think anybody really can give you one answer on that. And he wanted the answer. And it really started to overtake him. So in this particular case, I said to him, do you really want to try to work through this? In a very sincere way, not in a patronizing way. And he said, yes, I do. I said, okay, you promise me that you are not going to put that iPad down. When you're in the bathroom on the toilet, you are looking things up. When you come out of the shower, the first thing is that reach for that iPad. When you're eating, as minimal time to eat as possible. And of course, so making it work for him, making it become harder work, when he came in a week later, I said, how did it go? And he kind of looked at me sheepishly, and he said, well, I kind of got sick of it. And this was similar, and I want this whole talk to become OCD, but this was fascinating. An 11-year-old boy that I was working with who was kind of, pre-pubertal and was really struggling with a lot of anxiety and sadness and some anger, emotional reactivity over these sexual thoughts when he'd look at his mother or his sister, or he was in a pool one time, a community pool, and he was noticing, other people there and some young ladies, and he was really struggling with some of the responses that his body was giving him and felt tremendous guilt. But his big problem was that he kept going to his mom and dad and nagging them and wanting to tell them, because he felt like if he could just release this guilty thought, that it would relieve him. And so what I encouraged him to do was write down his thoughts first. And a lot of children and teens don't like to really write, especially if they're stressed out. And again, it wasn't said in a punitive way. And then go tell his parents, and he could even show his parents what he wrote down. And in some cases, I asked him to write it down 5 times. And so he got rid of this one fairly quickly too. It was really quite satisfying to see that he acknowledged that he could stop. And this overprescribing of the symptoms sort of thing really I've found can help. So at least in my work, I found that helpful. Of course, when the OCD gets really bad, I refer out to people who do a lot more of that than I do. And then there's generalized anxiety disorder. And this one I see a lot as well. That general sense of dread, that general sense of I can't stop worrying, I'm just stressed out all the time. For a lot of children and teens, what do you think the number one emotion is that they come in with, right? Anger. And this is so important. We're going to get to this a little bit today. We'll talk about the anger volcano, how anger is a surface emotion. But what I see so often are kids that really can't articulate that they're anxious. They'll just say that they're frustrated or they're angry. And we know that anger has these underlying emotions, and anxiety is often a big one. The fear of losing things, the fear of not having control, the fear of not being able to get what they want. And then another big issue is anxiety about anxiety, which is, I think, falls under GAD, generalized anxiety disorder. Like, what if I can't stop worrying? What if I never can stop? What if this is going to be the rest of my life? And so when you have anxiety about your anxiety, that's a big problem too. And again, the mindfulness approach, which is really about relating to your anxiety in a different way, like being able to say, okay, this is a part of me, but it doesn't own me. I like the metaphor, by the way, which I think applies to mindfulness, that I'm the sky and my emotions are the weather. So I still get to be Dr. Jeff, even though I'm feeling anxious. It's much better for me to say I'm feeling some anxiety right now, It's passing through. I'm struggling with this a bit, but it doesn't own me, versus to say, I'm anxious. I even try to correct children and teens and even adults and myself when I say things like that, because it feeds a distorted thought. I'm anxious? No, I'm Dr. Jeff and I'm feeling some anxiety. Or I'm ADHD. I hear that one a lot. I'm ADHD. No, you're Julio, or you're Antonio, or you're Javon, or you're Jeff, or you're Scott, or you're Sheila, or you're Sophia, and you're struggling with some of the things that ADHD are challenging for most people. That's what you're struggling with. But, you know, and I see a lot of adults do this as well. So anxiety about anxiety is something that I really try to help educate my clients to learn about, that it's normal to have anxiety. It's a big part of our lives. And going back to the pandemic and kind of coming out of the pandemic, I mean, my gosh, heightened anxiety up the wazoo, right? So we've been in very anxious times, and we still are. So I really try to help people understand that anxiety is a part of the human condition, and not to just think that because they have it, that they should quote unquote pathologize themselves and think that there's something wrong with them. I get so many children and teens in my, well, more teens, right, that, for example, they smoke weed, they vape, they smoke weed in other ways, they you know, and some other substances, or drinking, and help me understand, you know, why do you use it? What does it do for you? Well, it just chills me out. I don't know, you know, and they're not even in tune with the fact that they're treating their anxiety. They'll just say it in a different way. It just calms me down. But they're really not making that association. I might say, well, are you anxious? And they say, no, I'm not anxious. Nothing bothers me, you know. So really kind of educating people on how they self-soothe, right, in healthy ways. The breathing exercise that I demonstrated, or counting to 10, or going for a walk, or watching something amusing on YouTube, or playing video games in moderation, okay, doing sports, activities, drawing, playing a board game. All these are more healthy ways to manage anxiety, and it's really important to remind our children and teens that we work with that it's not about getting rid of your anxiety. It's about learning how to cope with your anxiety. As I said earlier in this talk, I think life is about 2 essential skills. I mean, obviously life is about many skills, right? STEM skills, communication skills, writing skills. But if you can't calm down, or at least be committed to having healthy ways to keep working on being able to calm down and problem solve, all these other skills are going to go by the wayside. Okay, so a couple things to cover before I wrap up on this intro with anxiety is that there's a couple triggering words. We're going to talk about them more. I find that most people who struggle with anxiety, they're saying, what if? What if I can't get this done? What if I'm stupid? What if I never get into college? What if this friend group never takes me back? What if other people don't like me? Shoulding all over themselves, S-H-O-U-L-D, shoulding. Okay, and I draw this out for a lot of kids in my practice. I'll write on a piece of paper, should equals feeling like a different SH, shame. And of course, when I create that pause, the parents are kind of looking at me. The kid who's 13 or 14 or 12 is smirking, you know, oh, shame, that's the other SH I'm talking about. And when you should all over yourself, S-H-O-U-L-D, courtesy of Albert Ellis and other cognitive behavioral therapy pioneers, when we should all over ourselves, then that tends to shut us down. So I might draw an arrow underneath the should word to can't, right? It becomes I can't. Now, should, then I'll draw a VS versus a more empowering word, like would like to, will strive for, will work on. I should have gotten an A on this test that I got a C on. Well, now I start to say, okay, I should have, and then if I struggle more, I can't do this, right? Versus I will work on. It's much more empowering, it's less punitive, it's less restrictive, and it helps us cope better. Okay, and by the way, with the what if question, I think that 7-word question that we all know that helps so much, I think it's 7, or is it 8? What is the worst thing that can happen. 8 words. Thank you. When we really ask ourselves in earnest, what is the worst thing that can happen, that can really help us get past the what ifs, because usually the what if isn't as bad as we think it is when we think it through and we give ourselves time. Okay, and of course those always or never words. Those are a problem as well. In fact, let's just do a preview right now. If you turn in your packet to page 13, you will see the common distorted thoughts among teens, and this is one of your objectives that I wanted to be able to have you feel like you could talk about at the end of this presentation on page 13. Common distorted thoughts among teens. Just a quick preview. All or nothing thinking, otherwise known as polarized thinking. And again, this fuels anxiety, depression, anger. We go back to that A example. If you don't get an A on the test, then you unfairly see yourself as a total failure. Jumping to conclusions, that's another one. You may think, you may see yourself as like, oh, they're gonna reject me when I go to this party, and you haven't even really gotten there yet. And we all do these things as adults. We certainly know we do. Or there's another one, negative filtering. So, you know, I might do this presentation, and at the end, I might get some feedback, and I may say, oh my gosh, I totally wiped this presentation out. I was horrible. But maybe there was just some constructive feedback, like, hey Jeff, you know, maybe you want to talk in a softer voice or go a little slower. And the same thing could go for a child or a teen giving a report in class, that they may be given one little piece of feedback and they kind of go global with it. They filter it the wrong way. Catastrophizing. That's where that what if kind of ties back to that. Usually what if is a launching pad for catastrophizing. And so what if I don't make the baseball team and kids give me a lot of heat about it for the rest of the year? What if I embarrass myself? What if I strike out when my parents are watching? That kind of thing. Or my uncle is visiting. Shoulding, we just talked about shoulding. Negative labeling, I'm lazy. I'm stupid. I see this so often, by the way, with ADHD and learning disabilities. It's so distressing, even when the parents start to say, you know, oh, well, you're just being lazy. And by the way, I have a sign in my office, and I can only include so much in the handouts, but hopefully you can envision this. The sign used to be, it would say on the sign 2 words, cannot versus choose not. So this sign would be cannot on top versus choose not. And I changed it about 5 years ago because I felt cannot is just so limiting and disempowering. So I changed it to struggle with versus choose not. So in other words, that when children and teens are hurting, when they're not getting their homework done, they're not turning things in, they're shutting down, you know, and the parents, of course, they're frustrated. Maybe there's other children to raise. They have jobs, or they have managing the home, or all of that. They need to kind of remember that most kids are not lying in bed in the morning saying, hey, how can I sabotage? How can I choose to bring havoc into my life? How can I make my life even more miserable for me and my family? Just the idea of remembering that there's as much as there may be a valid choose not, kids may get frustrated and shut down, there's probably some underlying struggle that they have. And the more that we can see that, the better. And that's why I encourage when kids are struggling in school, hey, can you try to get the school to do some testing to see if there really is something underneath their academic misfiring, whether it's anxiety, whether it's, you know, ADHD, distractibility, from that, a learning disability, a learning difference. That's really important. All right. I want to leave anxiety with a practical exercise right now from mindfulness. I want to give you a mindfulness exercise. So we're going to do a quick version of this. And this is one of my favorites, and children and teens tend to like this. And by the way, you can have your client, whoever that is, sit up the whole time. You don't have to have them lie down literally, but you can do it either way. So this exercise goes something like this. I'd like you to imagine that you're lying on a white, soft, puffy cloud. This is a very special cloud that you will not fall through. You're floating, relaxing on this white, soft, puffy cloud. And if you could all just close your eyes if you haven't done so and just go with this. And now I'd like you to imagine as you're floating on this white, soft, puffy cloud, the sun gently, imagine that you have sunscreen on, gently warming you, ever so gently, on your hands, on your arms, your face gently warmed by this sun. And as you're floating, I'd like you to take a gentle breath in to your belly, and you rise up a few inches, and as you breathe out, you float back down. And I'd like you to just keep doing this with me a few times. Floating on this cloud, breathing in and rising up, breathing out and floating back down. Breathing in and rising up a few inches. Breathing out and floating back down. And as you're doing this, imagine all the stress in your body, your worries, your anxiety, flowing out of you into the cloud, leaving you and going into the cloud and the air around you. Just float. Give yourself this chance to just be and float on this cloud. One more breath rising up, and one more coming back down. So in the interests of time for this presentation, I will keep moving, but I will ask you to try this on your own. And I think it's a really cool exercise for kids of all ages to be able to, again, when you think back to that hand model of the brain, to quiet down that amygdala, that reactive part of their brain, and kind of turn off their thinking brain in a good way and slow everything down. Okay. All right, let's now move on to depression. We all certainly have, as educators and mental health professionals, seen children and teens who are depressed. Up to 2.5% of children and up to 8.3%. These may vary a little bit depending on your community and where you are, but a pretty disturbingly high percentage of children and teens struggle with depression. I think that's a very fair takeaway. And often depression just doesn't exist alone. There may be some co-occurrence with things like anxiety, obviously anger, ADHD, learning issues, eating disorders, substance abuse issues, you name it, physical illnesses. Depression often comes along with something else. And of course, let's not, while we're on the topic of depression, let's not leave out suicide. I made a reference to it earlier. It's a big problem. My gosh, I feel so, I think it stops all of us in our tracks when we hear about kids in schools that end up taking their lives and the tremendous negative impact it can make. It's like throwing a rock into a pond, and the ripples just go out so far into a community when that happens. And that's why really keeping our eyes out, our ears out for kids who are struggling, what they're posting on social media. We need to stay really hip and tuned into that for any warning signs and intervene. So There's a talk on YouTube. It's a little dated now, but it was done by a guy named Kevin Brielle. I want to say B-R-E-E-L, Kevin Brielle. And it's something like Confessions of a Stand-Up Comic. And at the time he did this talk, I want to say he was 19 years old, and he was saying that he was captain of the basketball team and in the theater club, and tremendously successful student and known for his big charming personality, and he was a comic, and he provided such a sincere account of his own struggle with depression. And he said, my 4 words that I need to tell you is, I struggle with depression. And it was so powerful. It really resonated with me. And I encourage anybody to check out that talk, because he's got a lot of credibility. He was 19 at the time of that talk, reflecting on the struggles and how the pressures of social media, even back then, could really amplify so much of kids who are negatively comparing themselves to what they think they should, S-H-O-U-L-D, be feeling, that they're not happy enough, the anxieties and all the underlying struggles, and the anger. Let's not leave out anger. That can be a big component of suicide. Okay, well, going back to depression, the main symptoms of depression, which most of us have seen, are the persistent sadness or irritable mood, the loss of interest in activities, and I saw a lot of this during the pandemic. Obviously, kids were restricted and weren't able to do a lot of activities, but a lot of kids who were just really in shutdown mode. One young lady was telling me how she would just sleep all she could just to pass the days. Boredom was a big problem I saw that brought on a lot of depression as well. When we lose our sense of routine, when we lose our sense of structure, I've seen this over and over. I've seen it in myself. I've seen it in the children and teens I work with, that they're more prone to experience that kind of sadness. Difficulty with sleeping or oversleeping, psychomotor agitation, loss of energy, feelings of worthlessness, or just really blaming themselves, inappropriate guilt, just guilt for things going on in other people's lives that are just irrational, difficulty concentrating, recurrent thoughts of death or suicide. Again, it may not be all of these, but these are some of the warning signs, if you will, of depression. I do see a lot of the kids who are quote unquote brighter, gifted, more prone to depression. I've seen that borne out in over the 30 years of practice I've had. So that's really important to keep in mind. Often, the way that this is brought in, depression, kids often aren't going to come in and say, hey, I feel empty inside, Dr. Jeff, I feel sad. Although I do see those types of children who are more, and teens who are more verbal and perhaps psychologically minded and insightful. But we often might see, as mental health professionals, as educators, complaints about physical issues. You remember the William Osler quote from a little while ago that I mentioned, our bodies weep the tears our eyes refuse to shed, in a previous handout. They may act out, they may kind of not go to school, they're absent, they're not doing their work, they're shutting down, wanting to just leave home, outbursts of shouting. I'll be talking about this a little bit in the second part. I do a lot of work with children who are defiant, oppositional, and challenging, and often that can be the language of depression, the way it's acted out. Feeling bored, substance use, social isolation, fear of death, what does it even matter? A sense of lack of purpose too, like what's even the point? I've had so many teenagers look at me sometimes and say, well, what's even the point? And then being able to gently have them take interest in what they're interested in. Well, let's take a look at this. Maybe this doesn't matter in the way you think it matters right now, but does it matter to other people? And do they value what you do? And can you get some joy out of it? Maybe you feel you can't right now, but is it something that maybe you could feel later on, a little pride in this, or feeling like you've accomplished this, or you're okay that this didn't work out for you? Like, do other people experience setbacks too? So kind of a very gentle way to challenge, but not telling them what they should feel. We don't want to do that with children and teens. We don't want to do that with anyone. I don't like people telling me how I should feel. Again, I find that blend of mindfulness to create the pause, to kind of free kids of that heaviness through, I've demonstrated an exercise or two, the white puffy clouds, mindfulness exercises I do. I'll do one, I'm not going to go through all these right now, camera eyes, where I'll have them look around the room and notice everything they see, and then close their eyes and tell me what they see. And then when they're able to do that, they're in the present moment. We'll do things like imagining that they're a strong tree that has strong roots, big roots anchored in the ground, and the wind is blowing and they're blowing kind of along, being flexible, and the breeze introducing that sense of being flexible, or scenes from the beach or in the woods, quietude, types of nature, mindfulness meditation exercises. One of my past books was Mindfulness for Teen Worry, and that has a lot of these exercises as well. And I included those in some of my other more recent works as well. Obviously, when kids are really struggling with depression, and you know, they're not making movement, or they seem like they're so demoralized, I have about 12, maybe 15 now, psychiatrists. Sometimes I'll work with the pediatrician, depending on their comfort zone, in looking to have medication, at least a trial be considered, or have somebody who does that kind of work, assessing for medication, at least be in the mix. Okay, now, moving on to anger. Again, we're looking at big emotions today, and obviously there's a lot of emotions beside anxiety, depression, and anger. There's hurt, there's embarrassment, there's shame, humiliation, but anger, depression, and anxiety, they're the main ones that I'm talking. But implicit in what I'm saying is that there's many emotions. By the way, a great tool, I think, for any therapist, I have one in my office, is what's called an emotion board. And you can find those on Amazon, in Child's Work, Child Play. There's different therapist resource sites, ADD Warehouse, I believe, where you can get these types of tools. And I find sometimes when children look at me and they say, I don't know, then we'll pull down the board and I'll say, okay, well, how about we look at these together? And, you know, it helps them be able to articulate and verbalize, especially for those who are not as comfortable talking initially. All right, so the anger volcano, as much as this might look like a kid sort of model, I love the metaphor, because I think so many times with anger, we're so focused on anger that we don't really stop and think, well, wait a minute, why am I even angry? What's going on? I feel hurt, I feel humiliated, I feel embarrassed, I feel taken advantage of, I feel wronged. And when we can really, I feel scared. I feel scared right now, and that's why I'm angry. Why do I have to do this anyway? You know, well, actually, I'm scared that I even have to do this in the first place. Okay, so this is really important to use this sheet because it's got all these underlying emotions. By the way, anger gets a really bad rap, and I need to mention that as well. You know, anger has been behind some important changes in civil rights. I'm sure anger at some town meetings has been what's led to perhaps a stop sign or a traffic light put in where people have died in a community. So we don't want to vilify anger. It has an important function to help us cope. And if you remember, I think the two most important skills in life are to calm down. So when we calm down, even though we're angry, and focus, and then problem solve. Okay, I get a lot of kids that come in, by the way, and as I was mentioning, anger is their primary emotion, and otherwise they might be pretty emotionally constipated. By the way, I always joked to myself, with some people who know me, that if I ever really truly got famous, I'd want it to be for that term, emotional constipation. And then I went with incredible zeal and enthusiasm and Googled emotional constipation, and I got 20 million hits. So obviously I'm not going to be coining that term. But I think that's a really kind of, what can I say? It's a metaphor that resonates. When I get children and teens in my office and I'll talk about being emotionally constipated, it kind of gets their attention. And what I mean by that is that we're not able to really express our thoughts and feelings. It's kind of an intuitively appealing term, right? But most of the time, anger is the one emotion that a lot of children and teens come in with. They're just angry at their parents. They're angry about the school pressures they're facing. They're angry about all these other, social stressors they're facing. They have body image issues, and they don't really want to talk about them, but they're angry. We'll have an exercise we'll get to about that. So again, when you present this kind of sheet where they can circle things, where you can talk about it and help them understand what's underneath their anger, I think it's really important. Another good tool is an anger thermometer, the anger meter. This is on page 9. Just to be clear, the other one was page 8, the what's under your anger, the volcano. So for page 9 in your handout packet, when you look at this anger meter, you see it gives gradations of anger from being calm, of having no anger, to irritated, which is more of the mild to moderate anger. That's where you feel those stirrings of anger. You kind of are irritated, right? And then when you are upset, you have more serious anger. So that's really kind of getting beyond the moderate level. You're still mostly in control, but you're really starting to feel agitated, and you're really letting other people know that you're very angry. And then when you're furious, that's where you kind of feel out of control anger. And my goodness, I mean, I heard just the other day about a shooting on the Schuylkill Expressway with road rage. I mean, we hear about these accounts in schools, worker violence, where people's anger really gets them out of control. And I'll just back up a minute. When I was looking to share a definition of anger, there's so many definitions of anger, but Wikipedia talks about anger as an intense emotional state that involves strong, persistent sense of uncomfortable feelings with a non-cooperative kind of response to a perceived provocation. And certainly in our society, there's been a lot of things that I think have been more divided than ever. There's a lot of anger between groups in our society, a lot of polarization, and a lot of resistance and shutting down. So, anger is out there. It's a big one. And let's now talk on page 10, bringing in the body. I've kind of alluded to this a little bit with the hand model of the brain, about the neuroanatomy, if you will, of our brain and how our emotions are tied to our limbic system, our amygdala. This is on page 10. It's the anxious mind-body reaction cycle in your handout. And it talks about when you're feeling, here I have anxiety. It could be anger. It could be, in some cases, agitated depression. The breathing quickens. The body tenses. There's a physical response to pains. There's an increased focus on the body's responses. And then there's increased anticipation of even getting more anxious, that what if I can't stop my anxiety? I talked about that a few minutes ago. And then you just feel more helpless, and it spins. And so our bodies, again, weep the tears. Our eyes refuse to shed in some cases. Or we do shed those tears, and we still feel it in our bodies. Okay. So now I'd like to, I think children and teens really benefit when we can talk about triggers. So we're going to cover some triggers in our mind and body that cover some of these big emotions. In this case, we're going to look at anxiety, but again, this could be for so many emotions as well. This is page 11, called Discovering Your Mind and Body Triggers. And again, when children and teens have some kind of tool like this that you can go over with them and break it down, it adds structure to the sessions. And when you do it collaboratively, it really helps you connect, especially for no-talk children or children who really have a hard time articulating. As we're looking at these mind and body triggers on page 11, keep in mind that you can refer to page 13, which we jumped ahead before to kind of get a preview of. And there's, as you look at this table, that'll come in handy because we've got anxiety triggers like your school pressures, social situations, body image concerns, and family concerns. And by the way, I see these as the 4 main precipitants, if you will, the 4 main drivers of these big emotions that children and teens struggle with. This is how my book, the Anxiety, Depression, and Anger Toolbox, is structured. It actually provides CBT, mindfulness, and positive psychology amongst these 4 different categories systematically throughout the book. So on school pressures, there could be upsetting thoughts such as, I'll never get a good grade in this class, I just can't do chemistry, I'm just too stupid, that kind of thing. Social situations, we talked about some of those thoughts like, what if this group rejects me, I'll never fit in, no one likes me, I'm unlikable. Body image issues, I've heard from young women in my practice about hating their bodies. They don't have a thigh gap, they don't have a flat stomach, they don't have enough of a shape in other areas. I've heard guys come in talking about that they don't have a six-pack, and so they feel very self-conscious walking around, especially if they're shirts and skins in basketball or something like that, or in swimming. Family concerns. My sibling is somewhat smarter than me, or I'm not the pretty one she is. Those classics are still alive and well. So this sheet here on page 11 really kind of gives you a chance to then look at those thoughts, help kids perhaps examine where they may feel them in their body. And it doesn't have to be a one-to-one correspondence, but just bringing and raising that awareness that our bodies are often going to be signals that we might have things going on in our minds. And then really doing a processing, what did you learn? You can see some of these questions here on the sheet. What did you learn by identifying where anxiety shows itself in your body? And if they'd say, I don't know, then you can offer them, well, I know when I think about my body hurting and I break it down and I look at, what I'm thinking at the time, it really helps me feel like I'm more in control because I can really stop and realize there's a connection between my thoughts and my feelings, and that's really good to keep in mind. What patterns do you see and where you're, oh wow, I tend to get headaches before I have tests, or I feel nauseous before I have to do a presentation, or before I go to a sports practice or a big game, I feel it in my hands start to really tremble, that kind of thing. Or a pounding in their chest. Okay, so then as we go to page 12, looking at mindfulness for school anxiety, what I like about this sheet here, this tool, is it just kind of helps kids keep in mind what is mindfulness and what it's not. So it's about noticing your thoughts and sensations that help you, in this case, that help you key in on what's bothering you at school. So that mindfulness can kind of quiet you down and kind of look at what's really going on around you that's bothering you. But it's not about making your mind a blank slate or stopping these intrusive thoughts. It's really learning to kind of make peace with them and accept them. As I had written in my books, and no one has ever called me out on this, but as I understood it, which is a good thing, folk wisdom, common wisdom, is that there's about 50,000 thoughts that go through the human mind every day. So the idea that I'm going to be able to just make my mind a blank slate, get into some meditation pose and just it sets us up for unrealistic expectations. And I can't tell you how many times I've had kids, parents even, say to me, oh, well, those things don't work for me. Well, why don't they work for you? Because I get all sorts of thoughts that come through my head. Well, I can assure you that even if I did a mindfulness meditation with you right now, if I tuned into when I was doing the cloud one with you before, I'm sure I had things come in my head. If I was to really be honest with you at the time, did I pay my bill? Did I remember to leave something out at the house for my wife? When we go to, this weekend to visit friends, are we going to know exactly what we're supposed to bring? That kind of thing. So we all have a lot of things going on in our mind. Mindfulness is not some technique to free us of all these things. Having an awareness of your breath and your body, in this case, we're trying to apply it to school, in the classroom, in a gentle way to kind of center yourself if you have a test, but it's not a mysterious technique that's going to help you learn and without reading the book. Noticing what's going on in the moment, but it doesn't have to be achieved by meditating for hours at a time. It's recentering yourself to cope and gain hope. I like that phrase, cope and gain hope. But it doesn't mean that if you're doing mindfulness of any kind, breathing, picturing an image somewhere, doing a body scan exercise, where you kind of lie down and you just start to work through different areas of your body, noticing and accepting. It doesn't mean that you have to be, these are hotbeds for misery and being alone and dwelling and feeling disconnected. It's a way of feeling lighter and more free. But if you're doing some kind of mindfulness exercise one day and you do feel a little bit more detached or disconnected, learning to accept that. Kind of wherever you go, there you are. I think that was a book title by John Kabat-Zinn, if I have it correct. Okay, and it's about learning to react. That's the biggest application of mindfulness, that if you have school worries, in this case, learning to react to them in a different way versus I'm never going to worry again. All right, I covered these cognitive distortions among teens, so I'm not going to go over them again. This is page 13. Again, one of the objectives of the presentation is to kind of have a more heightened awareness of some of these distortions. And I think this is so important because the more that you're tuned into these, the better it is for helping children and teens you work with. Here's a table on page 14. It's a worksheet. I started you off with one where you look on this worksheet at negative thoughts, in this case about school, reframing the thought, CBT, and using some kind of cognitive, and then being able to list the category of the distortion. Again, page 13 comes in real handy. This is very CBT-ish. Again, you can set the stage for this in sessions by doing some mindfulness exercises, even just some simple breathing, 5 deep breaths. You could do the puffy cloud. You can do a guided image exercise. Again, my book, Mindfulness for Teen Worry, covers a lot of these exercises. There's many other resources out there on YouTube, many good books and sources. And also apps today. I like an app called Breathe to Relax. The word breathe, the number 2, and the word relax, breathe to relax. It shows you how to do really well-paced breathing. There's an app called Calm. There's an app called Headspace. Lots of good resources for mindfulness. Okay, so in this particular case, just to start you on the worksheet, I just can't learn chemistry. Then that would be the negative thought about school, right? A reframed, more helpful thought would be, even though it's hard for me, I'll get further if I try my best. And then what kind of distortion is that? Oh, okay, that's jumping to conclusions. By the way, in my office, a lot of times, I even do a more simplified version of this. I have a picture, well, not a picture, I have a fire extinguisher that's in the corner of the office by building code. And I'll sometimes use that as a metaphor, and I'll say to kids, let's sit down and look at your unhelpful thoughts about certain things, and then just look at a more helpful thought that you could have. So I don't even a lot of times mention CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and all this kind of terminology. And I'll just, based off of these distortions, have them come up with a belief that's really unhelpful, that gets them in trouble. I can't ever do my homework. I'll never complete it on time. I always procrastinate. I can't get anything done. So that might be the unhelpful thought. And then the helpful thought might be, well, you know what, following the spirit of positive psychology and grit, where we identify strengths, right? We identify things we've been able to do well. We dwell in well. That's part of positive psychology. I want to start to bring in a little bit of that today. So what we do is we come up with a more helpful thought. So, the helpful thought might be, well, wait a minute. I had a really difficult presentation last month. Somebody that I was assigned to in my group was really dragging their heels, and I took the lead and I helped us all get it done. Okay, that's great. And by the way, sometimes if I have a parent in with a child, particularly younger children, I'll literally give them my laptop and I'll sit with them and I'll let them draw up on just a sheet of paper. We'll write up unhelpful thought, UT for unhelpful thought, an unhelpful thought, then right underneath a more helpful thought. We do about 4 or 5 of them, 3 of them, whatever we can get done. So that's a really good tool that you can use, where you can even simplify this further. Okay, then page 15 in your handout is just about I like to go over things with kids, so Hey, what was it like for you to identify your unhelpful thoughts? Page 15, you can see, did identifying your counterproductive thoughts about school come up with more helpful thoughts increase your confidence? Hey, do you think that's something you could use more often? Do you think if you practice this on your own, it could help you? You know, what would get in your way of practicing this? Oh, well, I may not want to do it because I'll be busy. Well, okay, you know, I feel that way a lot of times too. I may not want to do things that are good for me, go for a run or work out in other ways, or do a little bit of breathing. In fact, I resist that stuff a lot, you know, and that's why I think it's really good that we can be open about how we resist it. Do you think sometimes that we tend to just want to look at things that bother us, and we forget that it takes a little work, but when we practice, we can feel better using some of these tools. So that way you can kind of chip away at resistance right in the moment too. Okay, here's another exercise for you. We're moving to the social realm, slicing up your social stress pizza. And your social stress pizza is really, it's an exercise where you can have the child, or you can draw this circle with 8 slices. And I just give some examples of what I think are typical stressors that get in kids' way in their social functioning. And then when they do go through this exercise, and they can literally write maybe on 3 slices, okay, I get frequent self-doubts. Oh, well, what are the self-doubts you get? And then it would be, we break it down and we talk about it. Or I get, I'm upset about being left out. I was not included on a text thread at the school, or Snapchat. I'm being left out, and I'm seeing what people are doing, but I'm not being invited. All that kind of thing, or being left off a Discord server, or unfriended and not being able to join in and asked to play on Fortnite, something like that. So this is just another tool that you can use that I think is very helpful as well. Okay. And then page 17 is just a way to process some of those feelings and some of those areas, rather, that make up social stress. So that kind of page 17 goes with 16. It's a way to process. Okay. I've made a few references to positive psychology. I want to make sure that I cover at least the basics of what that is, because I'm saying to you that what I see as the main interventions that help so many children and teens with big emotions is mindfulness, that blend, CBT, we've been covering those. Let me just highlight, there isn't a specific handout for that right now. I just want to cover this conceptually, what positive psychology really is. So please don't look for a handout and think you're missing anything specific right now. What I see as positive psychology, it's made up of 5 parts, and you can write these down. There's lots of great articles on positive psychology. It's covered in my books. One is to know your strengths. I see so many children and teens come into my office, and they're so tuned in to what they're struggling with, and they're not able to focus on their strengths. And I see a lot of parents coming into my office, leaning forward in their chair, stressed out, on my couch. They're leaning forward, and we start out with all these negative behaviors, and Stan isn't doing his homework, and Barbara doesn't seem to want to do anything but be on social media, and she's in her room all the time. Let's just slow it down a bit if we can. Let's talk about strengths. What are some things that you love and admire about your daughter or son? By the way, most of the time I start out with a parent. It's a lot to ask for a child, a teenager, even somebody in their early 20s, unless they want to come in themselves the whole time. I totally respect that. But a lot of kids, at least I start out the first part of the first session looking at what's going well in your life, and I'll say that. Hey, let's look at what's going well and what could be better. Okay, so I'm kind of introducing this positive psychology, dwell and well, which I think is an important part of treatment, of working with children and teens. I think, but this whole field of mental health is unfortunately so focused on the negative, on pathology, on diagnostic labels. And believe me, I think looking at what somebody's diagnosis is, it's conceptually, it's very important. It can help drive what interventions to use. For psychiatry, we need to know. For certain medications, I get it. But I also think we need to look at what are our strengths. And Martin Seligman's done a lot of great work with this. He wrote a book called Learned Optimism. So that's a great resource. And again, in my books, particularly the Anxiety, Depression, and Anger Toolbox for Teens, I have a whole section across the different stressors that kids face, from school, social, family, body image, that introduces positive psychology in every realm. So let's, again, positive psychology. What are we talking about? We're talking about knowing your strengths. I see so many children that don't know the things they've done well, or they're oblivious to what they've done well. We all have strengths. We might have a good, I've seen kids who maybe don't do well in school, but they do well on a part-time job. I see kids who socially feel they don't fit in school, but they go to a summer camp where they feel like they have a peer group that they socially fit into, or they're in scouts, or they don't do well, they don't seem to fit into conventional sports, but they love it at karate, or they love being on the golf team, or they love being in creative arts groups, theater, or dance, or drawing or painting, or any type of function that is not quote unquote what other kids are doing, but there's a strength there. There's an ability to connect with other people that they don't think they have just because they're self-conscious walking down the hallway in school. By the way, I would be self-conscious going back to any hallway in school. In the words of one young lady I was working with, she said, the hallways really feel like runways to me, like fashion runways, and that's how she feels. A different young lady I was working with, going to the second part of what I see as positive psychology, learned optimism. Optimism, okay, the idea of being able to look at the glass half full instead of half empty. I remember in graduate school, I failed a comprehensive exam. I was devastated. And my advisor, who was always this kind of stern, reserved, sort of disconnected guy, it was one of the most heartwarming moments. He looked at me and he said, as basic as this sounds, Jeff, I think you're looking at the glass as half, empty only. You passed some other parts. You can do this. Okay, well, maybe the glass is half full, or even more than half full, and I'm not seeing it because my amygdala is so dysregulated right now that my thinking brain is offline. Remember that hand model of the brain we talked about earlier, and I just think I'm a loser or a failure, or I'll never be able to be a psychologist, that kind of thing. All right, gratitude. That's another part of positive psychology. We have to have gratitude. Gratitude it's a mindfulness. It's about being in the present moment. It's very important. It keeps us in the here and now. And when we feel gratitude, we feel filled up. We don't feel like we're losing or missing things. Flow. There was a guy named, I want to say his name was Alex Hanold. He would be an extreme example of flow. The guy that climbed El Capitan. Free Solo was the movie. He climbed it without any ropes or any kind of devices like that. Well, you don't have to climb El Capitan to feel a sense of flow. It could be just having a good talk, doing a run with somebody, doing a run by yourself where you feel like time just gets suspended. A game of chess could bring on a flow state. Listening to music, giving a talk, that kind of thing. Even playing a video game within moderation. And grit. And I've made a couple points about grit. Grit is resilience. It's that ability to bounce back from resiliency. I want to say her name is Angela Duckworth at Penn, has done a lot of work on grit. I looked at some of her books. There's a lot of great grit resources out there. We need to help our kids in the spirit of positive psychology see when they were gritty, see when they worked through adversity. Okay, so that's important as well. Let me now make sure I cover on page 18. So I've been talking about the mind-body connection, and I'd like to kind of talk about the cycle of our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors. I'd like to bring in behaviors too. And I've been covering with CBT the idea that our thoughts drive our feelings, but let's make sure that we don't leave behaviors out. So for example, following the CBT model, right? This is page 18. You'll see that cycle. I have an anxious thought, then I get a negative feeling, and then I have kind of a problematic behavior. So, for example, it might be, I have no energy to start this LA project because I'll probably I'll just end up getting a bad grade. Or I've heard from kids in my practice, the teacher just doesn't like me anyway. Or, the teacher's always unfair. Or I just get blocked. I can't come up with anything. By the way, I was talking to a friend of mine who's a teacher at the high school level. I won't say which school. And I said, what do you do when a child turns to you or a teen and says they don't know what to write? Because my gosh, I've written 7 books and I still feel that so many times. And he said, I'll tell them to, and I know I need to watch my language on this tape, but I'll tell them to BS it. And I smiled at him. I said, you really tell them that? And he said, yeah, I do. And because if they take the pressure off and they just start with something, often that'll lead to a little something more. So anyway, in this case, I have no energy to start this LA project. So how do I feel? Again, if you have in your office some kind of mood chart, feelings chart, you can pick that feeling out and help them see. I feel discouraged. I feel disempowered. I feel shame that something's wrong with me, whatever the feeling is. And then there's the behavior, procrastination. This is a big one. I see this in myself, clearly, and I see this in so many people that pathologize themselves for feeling that they just are a procrastinator. One of the biggest things I'll do is I'll say, well, you have a tendency to procrastinate, that's pure CBT, versus you are a procrastinator. Can you try practicing that? Let's talk about that you have a tendency. Yes, you're procrastinating, but it doesn't define you. And then I'll bring in, as I mentioned before, maybe, you're Jeff or you're Sarah, and yes, you are struggling right now, but you are not procrastination. It's a piece of you, and it's going to pass through, and you're going to get by this. So this idea of our thoughts, our feelings, and behavior, very important. Okay, body image. I find that a lot of kids do not talk about this. It doesn't come out readily. I give an inventory in my practice, a self-esteem measure called the Pierce-Harris Self-Esteem Scale. It's got 80 questions, and it covers different realms of kids' lives. It's a true and false. Questions like, I like my hair, or I feel unattractive. And when I find that I can give kids this chance, that covers ages, I believe, 7 to 18, to put yes or no's, it kind of gives me a preview that they might have some body image issues. And again, often when I hear about the body image stuff, there's a lot of unrealistic kind of expectations. They're looking at the people on the homecoming court, and they think that they don't measure up, and so that, and again, I hear things about thigh gaps, and believe it or not, abs and hair and noses, and certainly we're in a very, very looks heightened and importance culture. So we don't have time to kind of go through all this, but if you look at page 19, it takes you through the sad, uncomfortable thoughts, the discouraging thoughts, and gives you more positive thinking alternatives. So that's a way to bring this in for body image sadness. And then page 20 has an exercise. It's a worksheet to talk about anger, about body image. If you look through that sheet, you'll see ways to visualize freeing yourself from body image anger. And that gives you that exercise. And we don't often look at how body image can relate to anger, but it's important too. All right, well, this concludes the first session. We're now going to take a 15-minute break, and I will be available for any questions via the Q&A in Zoom. Thank you. Okay, so now we're on part 2 of, again, the broad topic here is taming emotions for children, teens, and also in families. A lot of the work that we all do, I'm sure, is not just with children and teens, but with parents. So we're always thinking in terms of a family unit. That's kind of implicit, but I'm spelling that out now. And now I want to move a little bit more into the anger realm, anger defiance. One of my main books that I wrote years ago was 10 Days to a Less Defiant Child, which had a first edition, and then 2015 had a second edition where I tried to bring in more of the social media and digital communication and texting that goes on between particularly teens and parents, although I'm getting some kids that are getting their cell phones at age 9 or 10, and sometimes they need to have them to kind of let parents who are working, those that are, the world has gotten so complicated, right? Not working from home, but working in an office, let know that they got in the garage code okay. But my point is that that book, 10 Days to a Less Defiant Child, was the beginning of my journey into the world of defiant children and teens. So we're going to cover that as well. Let's flush out a little bit more on anger, because anger kind of is a nice dovetail into defiance. So we kind of covered anger to some extent in the first half, but let's talk a little bit. This is, again, this handout on page 22. This comes from the Anxiety, Depression, and Anger Toolbox for Teens. So this one looks about reframing, right? Reframing angry thoughts about family members. So the more that kids can learn to see their fellow family members, their siblings, even extended family, in a more reasonable way is better. It makes for smoother relationships. And one of the ways to do that is to change the phrasing, the way that they're referred to. So instead of she's lazy, she struggles at times with motivation. And by the way, I've had times where parents will call me and say, you know, I know you're working with Ben. Ben has the ADHD, but you know, Ben's brother really has a hard time grasping why we have different standards for Ben, why for school, or you know, why Ben gets to slide, quote unquote, on certain things. Say, Dr. Jeff, can you have a session with Ben's brother, or Ben and brother, or with the family to kind of explain this a little bit? And I'll say, sure, you know, I'm happy to. And it might be helping the sibling reframe this idea that, you know, Ben is just lazy to that Ben has some struggles due to motivation because he has ADHD. It's not an excuse, but it is an explanation. I like that line too. I'm not sure where I stole that one from, but whoever else says that, but I welcome people to use that at times, that when there are struggles, to reframe them not so much as an excuse when there has to be certain adaptations, but it's an explanation. It's a way to understand. And again, in the first half of this talk, I mentioned this sign that I have in my office, and I get a lot of mileage out of this one, where I have on top just 2 words. The top word is struggle with, and again, it used to be cannot, which I felt was too limiting. So struggle with on top versus, and then underneath that is the word choose not, right? So struggle with, is this child struggling right now with something, or is it just truly that they are choosing not to do this? And again, they may be shutting down as a result of certain underlying emotional stressors, certain types of learning issues, but more often than not, there is a struggle. And I find sometimes reminding a sibling, reminding even the parents who get so caught up in all the things they're trying to do, that this child really has some kind of underlying struggle and they're not just lazy in this particular case. Okay, how about he always has to be right? Well, you know, that can produce a kind of very reactive way of looking at somebody. It can be judgmental in its own right, versus he feels passionate. That's another reframing. She's a bitch. I'm sure you've seen that word thrown around to describe family members. Even your clients come in and they maybe have called that by their peers, or looking at friends or family members that way. That's a pretty triggering word, reducing somebody down to quote unquote a bitch. So really reminding this person in a gentle way, and I always lead with empathy. I can see this person really said some things that hurt you. I always try to make sure that I can slow it down and connect with my client, and then gently offer them a way to reframe that. I wonder if they're hurting inside. And there's this saying, hurt people hurt people. I think this comes from Al-Anon or AA, Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm not positive, but I really like that phrase too. Hurt people hurt people. That really kind of sums that up a lot of times. That when people are aggressive, when they're reactive toward others, they're probably hurting inside. And I think we can all do ourselves a lot of justice by remembering that. I know sometimes I forget that, and it really helps me when I slow that down. I certainly have been grateful at times in my life where people perhaps have given me the benefit of the doubt if I was a little too aggressive or reactive, that maybe they could just tell. So what a gift that we can give others. He's messed up. I've heard some of my child and teen clients at times refer to their troubled sibling, or see, there I go, their troubled sibling, their sibling who is struggling, I like that better, as being quote unquote messed up, and instead saying, well, they're struggling, or maybe they're going through a confusing time right now. They're exploring, they're not sure where they're at. It's another way to help coach children and teens to reframe those around them that they're struggling with. He's a slob. Well, that's one way to look at it, or, hey, you know what? I think this person struggles with organizational skills. It seems like those come easier to you. What are some strengths that they have that maybe you don't have quite as much? So again, trying to introduce more cognitive flexibility, and that's really a good thing about reframing. And the more that we can introduce that flexibility, the less we're going to take down anger. And then the rest of these questions, again, we're on page 22. It's the reframing angry thoughts about family members, are reflective types of questions. How helpful could it be to reframe your thoughts about your family members instead of just being locked into a certain pattern of seeing them a certain way? How would you want your family members to reframe difficult thoughts about you? So kind of the golden rule is brought in, right? Treat other people the way you'd like to be treated. That invokes that kind of reasoning. And what could get in the way of using reframing to control your own anger, to lower your anger about other people? Like, okay, it's really cool that you can see this now, but when you take this on the road and run with it in everyday life, what gets in the way of saying that? And I know sometimes even all this stuff that I'm sharing with you today, particularly when we get into the defiance stuff, when I look back as a dad, my kids are all adults now, and I still have to work at being calming down and solving problems, and they help me as well. But I think sometimes looking at what gets in the way, particularly when we're tired, we're rushed, we have multiple demands on us, we need to really kind of look at how real life sometimes can get in the way. And sometimes when I want to just throw all my quote unquote Dr. Jeff stuff aside, all this stuff that I'm trying to share with you, stuff from mindfulness, cognitive therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, and positive psychology, I realize that, well, letting my reactive brain take over and just run the show for me probably is not going to take me to a better place in my life, especially when I'm getting along or trying to get along with other people that I value. Okay, so that's the rest of this sheet. All right, then I provided on page 23, this is an ongoing handout, and a lot of these interventions come from one of my works called the Letting Go of Anger card deck, Letting Go of Anger card deck, which are 50 cards that help children and teens with interventions for anger. Some therapists have told me that run groups that they find them to be quite helpful to help children and teens share what types of strategies work best for them in different situations they face. So I'm going to kind of go over some of these right now. A lot of these are in the card deck. Some of them are just sort of from my own experience as well. So we talked about taking 3 deep breaths. Again, I can't stress enough that when you work with children and teens, as you know, they're often going to come back, just like any of us, because we're all human, and say, that doesn't work for me. So we really need to make sure that when we teach these things, we teach them in a way that's correct. And number 2, as I was just saying a little while ago, we need to kind of let them know that it's not always easy to do healthy things, to make healthy choices. Sometimes we'd rather just yell. Sometimes we might rather just overeat. Even for some kids, I'll empathize about how they might just want to do drugs. I'm not condoning it by any means. Please do not misconstrue that. What I'm doing is trying to be empathetic about the struggles we all face, to remember to calm down and problem solve. That the more that we do practice, the more that we give ourselves some slack, that maybe these interventions aren't always going to work perfectly, but certainly the more we do them, the better we'll get at them. And this is where I like to introduce, when it comes to learning how to take care of ourselves, that concept of neuroplasticity, which, by the way, I've heard more and more mental health professionals using this word. I think it's a cool word, and it helps us feel like we're smart when we use a word like that, neuroplasticity. And then what I'll do is I'll mention to my clients, they'll look at me kind of like, well, what does that mean? Well, think about it. You know, you don't remember this, but you had to learn to walk at some point, and I might get playful and kind of stagger and all that, and, you know, bump into things. And, you know, that when we learned to walk, we had to carve out new neural pathways. Or when we learned to talk, you know, and some drooling and all that, and then we learned how to kind of put our words together, that we're carving out in our brain these neural pathways that help guide us and learn new material, all the way to chemistry and the things like that in our lives. And then a lot of times when I'm working with children and teens, I'll talk about how they're at an age where they can learn new things a lot easier than their parents. And their parents are kind of looking at me. And actually, one of my props, by the way, very consistent with the times that we've been in, the pandemic times and moving out of the pandemic, there's relevance going forward too. This bottle of hand sanitizer that I'll hold up. And I don't have one right here to hold, but my bottle of hand sanitizer, I will grab the bottle and show them how the bottle itself is quite flexible, much like their teen or child brain. It's flexible, it's more plastic, they can learn things, they can carve out pathways a lot quicker. And then I'll grab the cap of the bottle, which as you can picture, the cap of a bottle is harder plastic. And I'll say that, you know, with my 60-year-old brain, or even your parents, who are most often younger than me, they can still bend a little bit, but you're at an age where learning new strategies comes even easier to you than your parents. So while your parents may think they know it all or know a lot, or you may think your parents know it all, you can learn a lot quicker. Actually, you probably don't. I'll say to them, you probably don't think your parents know it all, but there's probably some things you'll acknowledge that they do know and you don't. So I try to make it kind of a lighter topic about, you know, being flexible, learning, and that sort of thing. And I tie in the concept of neuroplasticity. Okay, so the main gist of all this, and I like these 2 words, I try to use them a lot in my own life, is we're all learning and growing. And I'll mention that too. When families first come into my office, I'll say to the parents, did Joshua here come with an instruction manual? You know, like, hey, when you're working on your Legos, you have those steps to follow. You know, your parents didn't get that with you. They're still learning how to be your mom and dad. I'm learning right now. I'm a therapist, I'm a psychologist, and I'm right in front of you. Like I'm learning how to do my job. And sometimes I feel like I know less now. Mom and Dad, do you feel comfortable knowing that? Than I did many years ago when I thought I knew it all. So the idea of learning and growing, I think, is a great way to provide a mindset that when you're introducing any kind of interventions, you're not introducing them as sort of the holy grail, that this has got to work, and if you're not doing them, either you're not doing them right, or that you should give up on them. All right, so with that preamble, let me go over some of these for anger. Of course, they can apply to other big emotions too. So the idea of taking the 3 deep breaths, I showed this in part 1 with the diaphragmatic breathing. Counting to 10, again, if you think back to that hand model of the brain that I held up, you're taking all this focus and activity that's in the dysregulated amygdala, limbic system, pushing up, and you're trying to bring back that thinking brain, that prefrontal cortex back online by doing a simple task of 1, 2, 3, 4, counting to 10. Stretching is a great way to relieve tension. So that's another thing you can help teens and children stretch. I like this one, take a vacation in your mind. Where would you go? And I'll see faces kind of break from maybe a strong kind of scowl or from just staring, and they kind of get playful. And well, where would you go if you had all the time and money in the world? What would you do? How would you do it? Avoid saying should. I talked about that in part 1, that when you should all over yourself, S-H-O-U-L-D, you feel like a different S-H, which is shame. Walking away, what a life skill that is, especially in a day and age where we're hearing more and more about shootings, even stabbings. I think, there's one thing to be assertive and to stick up for your rights. And then there's another part to follow your amygdala when you assess a situation is dangerous and you're not sure who you're dealing with, whom you are dealing with, that you may opt to play it safe and not start up with somebody, only to have some tragic type of situation with a shooting or somebody beaten to a pulp, which we've heard about and continue to hear about in terms of violence in schools and in communities. So that walking away, knowing when to say, okay, I'm going to take a break from this and get my head together. Is it really worth it right now in this very dangerous situation? And I can think of some as adults, as an adult. And I have other people that have told me about situations where it was a better choice, that they needed to realize, I need to let this go. Okay. Avoid thinking or saying always or never. That was on page 13 of your packet on those lists of all or nothing, distorted thoughts that covered all or nothing thinking. Exercise. I can't tell you how much I really value that. I know at times in my life where I've fallen out of exercise, I find that my patience is thinner. I don't feel I can manage my emotions as well. And I think exercise is a great way to help children and teens manage their emotions. I think in this digital age, certainly I'm not the first one to bring this up. Certainly for kids who are in organized sports and are doing an hour or two on the soccer field or football practice or fencing or swimming or different activities, tennis, whatever they're doing, they're getting their activity. But for so many kids that are not in these types of activities and they're kind of quote unquote just sitting, playing video games, it's not healthy. We all need exercise. And I think instead of parents commanding their children and teens to go outside and exercise, one thing as therapists we can do as educators is to empower the parents to go do things with the kid. Have a catch, throw a ball, go for a walk, run around, get goofy, go on the trampoline, whatever their comfort zone is, to do some fun things, okay, outside to get themselves moving. This is a part of positive psychology that is number 9 on the handout on page 23. Remind yourself of what's going well. Again, positive psychology is dwelling in well. It's so important to dwell in well because we're in a culture where we tend to look at, the things that aren't going well. Again, quick refresher on positive psychology that I talked about in part 1. It's knowing your strengths. It's learned optimism. It's optimism, learning to look at the bright side. It's having gratitude. Gratitude, again, I mentioned earlier, I think it's the #1 free emotional health tool available to anybody. By the way, I used to tie in gratitude with exercise. I would go running, and as I'm talking, I think I'd like to get back to this, and I'd make a fist when I was running, and then I'd use my fist and unfurl, if that's the word, my hand, and I'd say, okay, well, you know, I was invited by foundations to give a talk. Oh, that feels really good. I have some clients today that I'm going to go see. That feels good. You know, my wife called me today. Oh, I have a wife. I have someone who loves me to wish me luck on my presentation. That feels good. And hey, you know what? I just filled my hand as I'm moving with gratitude. So I recommend gratitude very much. You can tie it into pretty much anything. And again, it puts you in the here and now. It gets you feeling like you have enough versus you're not enough. It's a really great way to manage your big emotions and to coach children and teens to do that. Okay, so that's all tied into what's going well instead of wrong. Catch yourself controlling your anger. I really like this concept of putting positive differences to work with any experience our children and teens are struggling with. And I think the more that we can help children see and teens see when they're doing things well to manage their anger particularly, the better. One of the examples I give when I talk to parents, when I talk to families, children and teens is, well, to the parents, if you go out today and you buy, I don't know, a blue Toyota Camry, okay, just picking that, what are you going to start to see, used or new? What are you going to start to see on the roads tomorrow? Blue Toyota Camrys. Why? Because of selective attention. It becomes top of mind. And I see in so many families I'm working with where the child who's having the problems, I don't want to call him or them the problematic child, the child who's experiencing struggles, that it starts to become, that's what the association is, right? That they're a problem, okay? And to really learn to see blue Toyota Camrys, follow the metaphor, in a good way. In other words, put the positive differences to work. Well, you know, Jason really gets frustrated with his younger brother and goes really hard on him, but wait a minute, he just took him outside and they played house or horse when they were shooting baskets and they didn't get into a fight, and Jason walked away when his brother was upset that he lost instead of pushing him, that kind of thing. So the more that we can catch our children and teens making good decisions, regulating even downshifting. They don't even have to make perfect decisions, just when you catch them, being more flexible, having quicker recoveries. Okay, I'm using words here that really can bring into that management of the difficult to manage reacting brain. You made a quicker recovery. You were more flexible. You were more cooperative. Okay, for younger children, like up to age 8 or 9, I even advise making what I call a positive catch book, right? The child draws an image on the something on the front of the book, a notebook, Star Wars, dance, whatever they're into, and then the parents kind of use this book to write down instances where they catch this child or teen, mostly children for this type of book, although I have some teens who would be really cool about being playful too, if they were caught in the right vibe with their parents, but mostly again for younger children to go over the positive catches they've made. And again, it might be that they were resistant to doing a chore, and yet you caught them going out and cleaning up the dog poop, or putting the dishes away from the dishwasher, or making their bed, taking their dishes down from the bedroom if they were allowed that, hopefully that one time, to have them up there, or helping out somebody else in the family, or putting some things away, putting their shoes where they're supposed to go. Okay, and the more that we can really catch our children doing these good decisions, downshifting, managing their emotions, their behaviors, their feelings, the better it is. I'll have some parents say to me, yeah, but you know, he gets really upset if I give him a compliment. Well, that may be outwardly, and you don't want to overdo it, but you know what, at the time of this talk, I'm 60,
My mom's 84, and I still value having her be proud of me and give me positive feedback as well. Does that make me dysfunctional? Maybe some people may think so, but I kind of think it's cool that, you know, your children and teens and young adults, children of any age, value you more than you may think. They value your input. They may push back, there may be difficult times, but your opinion and your voice is going to matter. And you really want that the voice they hear from you is one of encouragement and support, and not one of discouragement and holding a mirror in their face of what they're quote unquote doing wrong. You want to hold up a mirror to what they're doing well, to the good choices they make, or the times where they thought things through and downshifted. Okay, so that's really kind of getting into what we'll talk about in a little bit with defiant children. Picture yourself by the ocean. That's a good mindfulness exercise. Slowly tense and relax your muscles. One exercise I have in a number of my books is the idea of grab a lemon. I'll have kids in my office and they'll talk to me about how they get angry. And I'll say, okay, can you grab a lemon? And they kind of look at me like quizzically, like, what? What are you talking about? I say, you know, like in your head, like you have tons of lemons. Like if you just use your imagination, imagine like grabbing a lemon right now, right, in your right hand. So if everybody will do this with me right now, please. Okay, we're on page 23, and you know we're using number 13. We're going a little more specific than just slow tensing and relaxing all of our muscles. We're going to go right to our right hand as one of the areas. We're going to grab a lemon, and we are going to squeeze some juice out of that lemon. Go ahead, come on everybody, please. Come on, grab your lemon and squeeze, get some juice out. There's a hole in the bottom of that lemon. Squeeze, drop the lemon. Isn't it kind of cool? Like you really feel a difference in your hand. And guess what? Your hand is attached to your arm. Your arm is attached to the rest of your body. And by just squeezing that lemon, squeezing some juice out, go ahead, squeeze it again, squeeze it again, squeeze it again, get some more juice out, more juice out, more juice out. Drop the lemon. Okay? And you get that association of being stressed in your body and relaxing it. And by the way, there's versions of this exercise. You don't have to just use a lemon. You can get creative. Imagine that there's a fly moving around. It just landed on your nose. Go ahead. Nobody's looking. Wiggle your nose. Wiggle your nose. Get that fly off your nose. Get that fly, okay? And now relax. Oh, it just landed back on your nose. Wiggle your nose. Yeah, the same idea. Tensing up a specific area of your body, a certain region of your body, and relaxing it. And you can do this as an exercise, a rapid relaxation exercise. Let's all do this. Tense up in your chair right now. Tense up every muscle. Make fists. Push your feet down through the floor. Tighten up your abs. Everything tight, 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 tight. Let it go. And so you could repeat this a couple times, and it's a great way to manage anger. One of the things that I talk to sometimes with children who feel like I get guys coming in that do cutting and girls, and I'll say, you know, respectfully, but I'll say, you know, one of the best things you can do if you're feeling self-destructive is to get down and do some push-ups. You know, whether it's on your knees, whether it's an actual push-up. I find that if I try to do push-ups, it just truly makes me feel a lot more at peace when I'm done. I lose that destructive urge. So something physical, it can really help release. Give your pet some attention. I'm a proud dog grandpa. My daughter, my youngest, has a little Chihuahua named Bug that I go absolutely crazy over. I love this dog very much. So at the time of this presentation, my wife and I are looking at getting a dog in the next month or two. It's been a while, but we'll see. It's a big commitment, but I certainly love animals, and I know that during the pandemic, one of the things that was so cool when I was doing so much work with online therapy with children and teens, I'm going to get to online therapy in a little bit, was getting to see so many homes in Chester County, inside the homes, and pets. I can't tell you how many sessions I did where kids were bringing their dog or their cat it's kind of funny, you know, because they'll tell me they have a cat or a dog. I say, oh, Dr. Jeff, just wait. I'm going to go find the dog. And the parents are kind of like, you know, we're paying for this session. Go, Josh, go get the dog quickly. You know, they're not saying we're paying Dr. Jeff by the minute, but it was implicit in their hurried tone. So anyway, but I did get to see some dogs and cats, and certainly those could be anchors of mindful. I mean, how much more mindful can you be petting a dog or a cat who's loving up next to you? Talk about mindfulness in its ultimate form, right? Okay, think of happy memories. That's another one. I'm jumping around a little bit here, but remind yourself of how your anger will feel worse. Now that's kind of bringing in a little CBT, a little kind of prefrontal cortex, which is an important question. And a lot of times people will say, well, I can't think of that at the time. I know, but if you practice saying that, how will I feel afterwards? That may help you. I had one young man that came in and kind of learned the hard way. He was a student at a very big university in central Pennsylvania that has a phenomenal football team. And he ended up, at one night, he was this a couple years ago, he was at a bar, pre-pandemic, and his girlfriend was there, and apparently there was a young guy there that had an interest in his girlfriend, and he was feeling very threatened. So talk about, you know, what's underlying your anger kind of thing. He felt a lot of fear and a lot of jealousy, and he went to the back of the bar. There was a steel door, and he teed off and punched the door. Well, you know, I don't like to do sports gambling or anything like that, but if I was going to pick who's the winner of a human fist and a steel door, I'm going to go with the steel door. And at the time he saw me, he was in a sling with a boxer's fracture. So certainly realizing that, you know, anger can take you to a place of doing these types of things is very, very important. And maybe being able to ask, how will I feel after I do this? Not putting yourself in physical harm, or even doing something with other people that you could end up getting yourself in trouble. We've all known people. I had a friend that used to be a psychologist at Chester County Prison, and he would share with me that, you know, a lot of the inmates there, people that he knew, the line might be thinner than you would think, Jeff, he would say to me, you know, that if somebody lost their job, there was they lost a family member, they had a substance issue, and a couple things came together, and they crossed the line and did something that then landed them in trouble with the law. Very much driven by their anger. So, and we still hear, obviously, all the time, or very often, about people who lose their stuff and end up getting very angry and hurting themselves. So I don't want to go through every one of these, but I'm just trying to highlight some of them. Again, I'm on page 23, ways children, teens, and grown-ups can control their anger. But, you know, having realistic expectations, number 22, that's a very CBT type of way of addressing anger, right? Like, not everybody will like me. Albert Ellis said, you know, we have to accept that not everybody's going to like you. It's okay. It's only normal that people won't like you. So at least some people. Talking out your frustrations. By the way, going back to that hand model of the brain, I don't know if I mentioned this or not, but with Dan Siegel's hand model of the brain that I'd gone over, one of the cool things that you can tie into when you talk about the hand model of the brain is that when you do talk about things, right, you use your prefrontal cortex, you name it to tame it. Now that may sound kind of, I don't know, juvenile to some people, but to me, as a therapist, as a grown adult, I really like hearing that. Like, hey, when I name things, I tame it. I tame my reacting brain. Name it to tame it. So I like how it kind of justifies and supports the idea that when you talk things out, you feel better. It's, again, tying in this kind of anatomy model into the type of work that we do. Okay. Distraction is a good way within reason. It's not a permanent solution to manage anger, but it can certainly sometimes create that pause. For sometimes, you know, it could be a video game, it could be a YouTube clip, it could be stretching, it could be drawing a picture, it could be writing something in a journal. Know the signal of anger. We talked about how our bodily signals in response to those big emotions could be tension in the hands, flushing in the face, tightening in the chest. Here's another one that I think a lot of children and teens can really kind of resonate with, is the idea that, and I used to say ready, aim, fire, but I stopped myself because, in an era of school shootings and violence, I don't think I want to say that, but I'll say, do you want to be, is it better for us? I know when I'm ready, set, go, instead of go, set, ready, that helps too. I'm still on page 23, by the way, just covering these 2 pages that are covering ways to manage anger. Go to page 24, I'll just highlight a few of those right now. And asking yourself, what's the worst thing that can happen? I mentioned that that's a way to manage anxiety, but it's also a really good way to manage anger. If I say to myself, okay, I'm angry that I have to wait in this line, okay, the worst thing that can happen is I'm going to be a little delayed, but it's not the end of the world. Today, getting here to do this presentation, I made a wrong turn, even though I left plenty of time. And then logistically, I missed an email that I pride myself on checking emails, so I was a little delayed. I was pretty stressed out. I tried to use humor to manage some of my frustration. But I also was saying to myself, in the midst of it all, what's the worst that can happen? I mean, is it going to end my life? Well, hopefully not. I don't want to cut through lanes that I'm not supposed to. That could end my life, that kind of thing. Okay, know your hot thoughts. We all have certain things that we say to ourselves. This is, again, getting back to CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. And Albert Ellis did great work with this. He wrote some really good books around anger and CBT. It's not fair that I have to do everything. Everyone is bugging me. I hate this. I do get a lot of children that are coming in with that I hate this, it's not fair kind of thing. And when I can do work with them over time of helping them look at when they do manage things, when they do handle setbacks and disappointments, when they do accept certain accommodations made for a sibling, and how this helps them get more of what they want. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, hey, you know what? If you can have a constructive conversation with your mom and really talk things out about why it bothers you, would you agree that that's probably better than losing your video games if you break something or throw something? I know right now it's something you can see, and I know when you're upset it's hard to see, but is that true? And do you think if you make a sign for yourself to calm down, or have a calm down corner in your house, that could be helpful for you. I had one client during the pandemic. She did a wonderful job, the mother, of creating a calm down corner for her son, who at the time was 6.5, 7 years old, who was really struggling with a lot of academics. Turned out he did have a learning issue. And I remember sometimes I'll ask kids, just if they don't really want to talk, I have this card deck called You Know. You can probably find it on Amazon, and it's got these really cool questions on it, which are like would you rather questions. And I find myself as a therapist, by the way, often when I have a child or teen that's kind of resistant to speaking about things, I look at myself as sort of like an airline pilot. Like I'm trying to talk to that child or teen's control tower, right? So sometimes I have to circle before I can get a runway, before they'll open up a runway. They may not open up a runway. I may not get to land. I may not be able to land that day or on that topic. But if I ask certain kids questions like, would you rather get electrically, this is from the card deck, would you rather you get electrically shocked when you're not sure what to say, or when you have self-doubts, when you doubt yourself, or when you say something that you feel is foolish? Would you rather get electrically shocked if you have doubts about yourself, or when you feel you said actually something foolish? Oh, so then they're going to pick one. Oh, well, when I say something foolish. Oh, well, tell me a time when you said something foolish, or you thought you did. And, so then we can get back to those big emotions, anger, anxiety. So for me, this sort of metaphor works of being a pilot, trying to help see if they'll open up a runway for me. And I like sometimes when I feel like I'm stuck to just go to some of these types of questions on that card deck called You Know. Another question, I'm trying to remember some of the questions on that card deck. One question that's really cool that I'll ask kids and teens is, would you rather your nose grow longer when you lie, or your face turn blue when you're sad? See, so I may get further with that than turning to a child and say, do you ever get sad? No, or tell me a time when you saw, I don't know. But now if they pick between the two, oh, well, you know, I'd rather get, you know, I'd rather my face turn blue when I'm sad. Oh, well, can you tell me the last thing you were sad about or something that makes you sad? And then I find if a kid won't talk about themselves, I'll say, well, you know what? You're telling me that, you know, you don't know when you're sad, but what would make kids your age sad? Like when you think about kids that you know, what's something that would make them sad? Well, you know, that somebody died in their family, or their parents got divorced, or, you know, a pet died. Oh, well, I know your pet died not that long ago. You know, what was that like? So again, I try the best I can to kind of get there with a child or teen in a way that's going to feel non-threatening, non-pressuring. So that helps me when I'll ask those kind of seemingly non-directive questions, which are, you know, would you rather, but then it helps me land and refocus on a direction to try to get back to where I want to go with a child or teen in a session to have them look at difficult things. Certainly when working with children and teens, sitting down, crossing my legs, sitting back and looking at them and say, so tell me how you're feeling. Now, I've had some 11-year-olds, 9-year-olds who are more articulate and verbal than some adults, but more often than not, I kind of have to be active and use these other methods that I'm referring to. All right, so you can look yourself on this sheet of now moving to page 24, the rest of these ways to cope with anger, you know, take a bike ride, visit a friend. Oh, here's one last one, slam your imaginary door. So this rechannels a physical impulse to want to, and behavior, to want to like slam the door, to mentally slam the door. Okay, now let's practice you slamming it, but not quite as hard. Well, how about now just close the door? So you kind of make gradations with children. So that works as well. By the way, in terms of managing emotions and self-regulation in general, I'm going to tuck this idea in here. There's a guy named Chris Willard out of Harvard, done a lot of work with mindfulness, and he does this thing where he'll have kids scale the intensity of their behavior with something called silly walking. I can try to demonstrate this here. I'm hoping the camera will still see me if I'm over a little bit. Am I okay? So I'll have a child literally stand next to me, and whether the parent's in the room or not, and I'll make a joke like, hey, please don't put this on YouTube or anything, as Dr. Jeff is doing this weird stuff. Of course, I'm being taped now. And I might say, okay, let's start out and walk normal. Let's walk regular. So we kind of walk like this. And Chris Willard he talks about the old Monty Python shows where, you know, there was that kind of, so now if we walk really 100% silly, you know, so now I'm 100% silly, and okay, well, let's do like 50% silly. So we're talking about regulating and awareness and mind-body connection. So and so on. So that's just a really cool tool, especially for kids who are not as verbal, to talk about motion management, mind-body awareness. And it's very disarming, as you could imagine. Okay. I want to talk a little bit now about managing defiant behavior. And this involves, obviously, coaching parents. I get a lot of parents that come into my office, some who pridefully describe themselves as old school. Now I'm moving to page 26, sample parenting sound bites for managing defiant behavior. Before I get to that, let me give you a little background on my work with defiant behavior. You know, every book I've written has come from my own pain, my own struggles. Many years ago, over 20, I went through divorce, and you know, I said, well, what can I learn from this? So I wrote a book for couples called Why Can't You Read My Mind, about all the toxic thoughts we get toward our significant others, you know. So, you know, she always has to be right, or, you know, he's a basket case, or she's just a worry ward, or, you know, you bounce that check and now you're going to put us in the poorhouse. This kind of CBT model, which really kind of followed a book by Beck, Al Beck, who wrote, I think, a book called Love Is Never Enough, and mine was Why Can't You Read My Mind? Overcoming the 9 toxic thinking patterns that get in the way of a loving relationship. So that book came from a very difficult time. And then I wrote a book after my kids, when they were young, looked at me and said, Dad, you're a psychologist and you work with families and you can't even manage us. And you know, that was very humbling because I am a yeller in recovery. I used to yell a lot. I read the 1, 2, 3 Magic by Tom Phelan, and I was just like Phelan, and I would just have them be in timeout for everything. I'm not proud of any of this, but I like to be open. I like to be real. One time I was feeling very desperate, and I washed my son's mouth out with soap. He was 10. You know, he's, by the way, a competitive power lifter. He did like a 420 bench and a 660 squat and a 720 deadlift. All no substances, all natural, raw. And most importantly, he's a great guy. But I'm glad that I changed my ways. Put it that way. And but it came from really making those mistakes of letting my own emotional reactivity when I was a parent get the best of me. And I will say this, our kids are going to follow our lead. I like the metaphor of, I don't follow racing per se, but Indianapolis 500, there's a pace car. It sets the pace. And when you have a child who is defiant, who is oppositional, who is resistant, and it threatens you as a parent, because I said so, because I'm your mother, I'm your father, you will listen to me. And then that, especially if that child has some kind of underlying anxiety, depression, and most of us have something, right? ADHD, that there's something going on where that child cannot regulate their emotions well, and then you start with consequences up the wazoo. And I'm not anti-consequences. I think consequences are really important for accountability. But at the end of the day, would you not agree that if you can have a child or teen or young adult have a constructive conversation, that is certainly going to help promote what I think are the 2 most important skills for life, the ability to calm down and problem solve. Isn't that better than just depending on consequences? Because I'll get parents coming into my office. Dr. Jeff, I took away all the video games. I took away all the other privileges. I took the door off the room. And he's still defiant. Huh, go figure, you know? So, or maybe he or she, they are not defiant now, but they're on the bottle it up and explode later plan, or implode later plan, cutting, things like that. So, I won't say that I've seen it all, but I'd like to think that I've seen a lot. And when it comes to managing defiant children and teens, I think the best thing that you can do as a parent is be calm, firm, and non-controlling, and I say this in 10 Days to a Less Defiant Child. And what I also encourage therapists, educators to try to do with parents who are frustrated is to coach them on being a coach. I'll say to parents, can you see yourself as your child's emotion coach? Because the more you see yourself as their coach, the less you'll take it personally as their parent. Don't get me wrong. You'll never abdicate. You'll never lose your authority, your role of being the parent. It's not about that. It's just having another lane to shift into so you can go slower. Because if you speed up on that track as the pace car, oh yeah, because I said, and the child says, no way, and then the child speeds up, you speed up, they speed up, faster and faster around the track, crash and burn. There's no way. That's where it's going. And we all know that. And then sadly what happens is, well, we apologize, but we really didn't talk about it. So we never really had the constructive conversation. We just let time kind of calm down our amygdalas, but we didn't really learn from it. So discipline, yes, it can bring in some consequences that are thoughtful and purposeful and have meaning. But discipline comes from the word disciple, to teach. And it's very important that when we do discipline with children, that we teach them. And at the end of the day, I think having a constructive conversation is much more important than any consequences. Again, I'm not anti-consequences, and I think we need them, but things have to get talked through for that learning to really happen. So I'm going to share with you some sound bites that I think seem to resonate with a lot of parents that bring in what I call the calm, firm, non-controlling approach for emotionally reactive children. Because remember, when their amygdala is firing up and their prefrontal cortex, their thinking brain is offline, those consequences may not really be teaching much because they're just so angry. Okay? There was a scene, oh gosh, I think it was the movie The Breakfast Club. It's a dated movie, it's from years ago. But I remember this one student was acting out and the assistant principal was, you just lost this, you just lost that. I can't remember the actor's name who was, but it was such a great portrayal of how it really didn't solve the problem. This was from an educator, but it could have been a parent. Okay. There's a couple sound bites for you. And these are things that I think you can share with parents. If you like them, you may not. You may think some are good and some don't resonate. That's okay too. We're all looking to find what works for us as individuals and our clients. So here's one. Yes, you're right. I'm yelling right now. That's not going to help either of us. I apologize. I'm going to collect myself and let's try to talk about this calmly in a few minutes. So if a child or teen is bringing up to you, or the parent that you're working with, that they're yelling, owning it models, coaching-wise, ownership, right? The more you can coach them on modeling self-awareness, what a gift you're giving your child. Parents get so locked up and, well, I'm right on this. Well, but maybe my reactions aren't so right. Maybe they're not so healthy. So taking ownership is really important. Here's another one that I think it's not patronizing. None of these are patronizing if you speak from your heart. Don't think of these as a script. Think of them as a mindset. A mindset is far more helpful than feeling you have to follow a script. The words will come to you as long as you have a mindset. The mindset, again, calm, firm, non-controlling. As a reminder, I'm on page 26 here. Right, sample parenting sound bites. I hear that's how you see it. I see it differently. But you know what? Maybe if we agree to disagree, we'll get to a better place. And I kind of paraphrase that one, but that's the gist of that one. Another one, always lead with empathy. I can see you're really frustrated. Again, you use empathy, you appeal to that reactive brain, you calm it down, you create that pause. I hear you. I get that you're really angry at me right now. And you say it slowly and you say it with purpose, not while you're texting somebody. By the way, that's a whole separate discussion. I can't tell you how many kids have complained to me that their parents tell them to put down the screens, but their parents are on the screens as well, their phones or whatever. And I can't tell you how many times my wife and I might be watching a series on Netflix or something and 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 into the next episode. And then we're on, and parents I know that are doing this too, whatever it is, Game of Thrones or Breaking Bad from years ago, whatever it is. And then they're upset. They can't understand why their kids are still pulled into some of these video distractions. Okay, so I hear that's how you see it. I see it differently. That was one. And then back to, I can see you're really frustrated. It's empathy. You get through to them. It doesn't mean you agree. Empathy does not mean, okay, I see it only your way. Empathy means, okay, I'm trying to understand your perspective. You feel that because I gave your sister more time to play and do her thing, and you have to do your homework right now, you feel this is really unfair. I understand, yeah. Let's talk more about how we can get to a better place with this. What do you think we can do? Can we change where we do your homework? Can I check on you a little more just to help you so you can have some more time? Are you okay with that? By the way, I don't have a problem going to the whole ADHD realm with how much parents help their kids as long as the kids ask for it. All right, so you can check out these sound bites. I want to leave the rest of the time for talking about working online with children and teens. Okay. When I was in the pandemic, thrown in it March and April 2020, I was in a panic. I mentioned earlier in the first part, I did a presentation to the Pennsylvania Psychological Association. Here's some things to keep in mind for online work with children and teens. The biggest thing I'll tell you is from my experience as a clinician, and this is why I'm not devoting a ton of this to this. Yes, I still do some, but when my office started to open back up, I'm on page 27, most parents I deal with prefer to have their children or teens come in. Now, I still have a few teens that want to see me online. We work pretty well together, a couple kids here and there. So let me cover this. Okay, number one, if you're going to do any online work with children and teens, I found that I really needed to expand my role to a therapist, a teacher, comedian, and puppeteer. Okay? Not just the typical therapist, Dr. Jeff, in my office. Number two, I had to keep learning on the fly what to do because I had tremendous anxiety being in front of a camera, just like I've done this whole talk with all of you. I had to monitor what helps and what doesn't. And I try to even use parents who sometimes are staring at me as the beginning of a session as a co-therapist. I would try to praise successive approximations. Oh, I really appreciate that you're helping me with this. Thank you for showing me this. Oh, we just did a picture on Zoom together. This was really cool. What do you think? So really structuring and guiding. With kids with ADHD, I had to give them breaks. I would also try to realize that the advantages of online therapy, it can stretch us as therapists to be more creative. It allows us to see the home setting. That can be valuable. It provides the child or teen with a unique sense of emotional safety for those who are resistant and don't want to come to the office. You get to see siblings sometimes. Things pop up in sessions like that, so it helps. The challenges. You need to be mindful of your own performance anxiety if you're going to do any online work. As a therapist, pressuring yourself too much to make things happen cost me in one session where a kid got a little flustered and embarrassed because the parents were staring at me at the beginning. You have to know how to feel therapeutically connected by checking your gut. Know your value. I mean, when somebody's in my office, I can just feel a little more value versus feeling threatened about my value like I'm on camera right now and tape. I'm a little more anxious. I still have to remind myself, okay, I'm trying for this talk. I want to impart good information. I'm not perfect. And you lose that sense of your special place, your office, and you need to monitor the role of parents if they're involved and try to have everything be collaborative because online it can all just feel sometimes like you're losing control and it's going south. Thank you. We covered a lot today. I appreciate the time and attention that you gave to me. As we're closing now, I'll be here for another 15 minutes of Q&A that you can send in through your Zoom.